Welcome everyone to MTG News with MysteryMTG.com, your one-stop shop for Magic crates, hard to find singles and sealed product, and much, much more. Now, let's start with the biggest news of the week, bannings and restrictions. Man, there was a pile of cards that got banned this week, nerfed, buffed, from Pauper to Historic, so let's go over them one at a time, one format at a time. Beginning with Pauper, our first banned card is ATOG. That's right. I remember opening one of these back in the day in a revised pack, actually, when I first started playing Magic. And while it's an iconic card and many people love it, Pauper players rejoice. This is what many Pauper players have been clamoring for, a serious blow to Affinity, the most popular and powerful deck in the format, by a long shot. So, good riddance ATOG. Number 2, Bonder's Ornament and Prophetic Prism are also banned in Pauper. Now, Ornament, it's a common designed for play in Commander, but because of the Pauper rules, yeah, it's a common. It's allowed to be played in Pauper. And it gave the Tron decks, another deck with one of the highest win rates in Pauper, a source of easy card advantage. Prophetic Prism also greatly benefited the Tron decks by allowing them to essentially play 5 colors. They could play any colors they wanted without even paying a card for it, since the Prism would draw you a card. So this caused a whole swath of other strategies to be invalidated because Tron generates so much mana and card advantage, goes over the top of control decks and mid-range decks alike. So many players are very happy to see it go. So, if you haven't given Pauper a shot, hey, now might be a great time to get involved because a lot of new strategies and decks are viable again, so find a deck that interests you and get playing. In Legacy, Ragavan Nimble Pilferer has been banned. Now, this takes the dominant blue-red Delver decks down a peg, and while that may be something that many players pined for, it doesn't really shake up the format too much in terms of opening up new strategies or decks that were suppressed by Blue-Red Delver or that weren't viable before the ban. So some players are happy that the price of Ragavan will be coming down, but other than that, not really too much to say about the Legacy ban. In Standard, we see yet another whole slew of cards getting banned, with Alrund's Epiphany, Divide by Zero, and Faceless Haven all getting the axe. While Alrund's Epiphany has been public enemy number 1 in Standard since the last rotation, Divide by Zero and Faceless Haven were cards not many of us thought would get the banhammer. It's clear that Wizards of the Coast wanted to completely gut the blue-red turns deck in Standard, which allows mid-range and black-based decks to finally see the light of day and be relevant again. But many are left wondering why Faceless Haven was also removed from the format. This is a huge blow to the monocolor tier 1 decks like mono white and mono green, and essentially takes away the whole reason to be monocolored in the first place. So where does this leave Standard? Will the white deck branch out into a second color, like maybe red for Showdown of the Skalds? Or will Isika's Chariot become even more ridiculously oppressive now that Divide by Zero is gone, one of the things keeping it in check? Well, we can only wait and see, and hopefully things shake out for the best. Now on to Alchemy and Historic. I lump these two pseudo formats together since the nerfs and buffs and bannings and unbannings that occur in Alchemy also carry over to Historic, affecting both formats for some reason. First, to no one's surprise, Memory Lapse has been bumped up from suspended to ban, sure. But more interestingly, Teferi Time Raveler has been unbanned and nerfed. The card costs 4 mana now as opposed to 3, has 5 starting loyalty instead of 4, but most importantly, it can only stop opponents from casting spells on your turn, so it doesn't affect Dreadhorde Arcanist and other cards like that in Historic. So, before players can break down exactly what impact, if any, this will have on Historic, they have to first contend with the Alchemy buffs and nerfs that have been implemented, as these will affect Historic as well. 18 different cards were rebalanced this week, and while many of them from Puppet Razor to Asurarak to, well, any of the other 7 cards that have the word Venture on them won't really make any difference at all, there are a couple big changes that many players aren't very happy about. Hullbreaker Horror, while very powerful, was mainly used as an anti-control tool. Now that it's been nerfed to allow it to be countered on the stack, it's lost most of its power in those matchups. Now it's just like another Nezahal, basically, maybe worse. Another blue powerhouse that got handicapped was Lear, or Lier, Disciple of the Drowned. Now you may only cast spells from your graveyard on your turn, drastically limiting the effectiveness of Divide by Zero and other bounce spells in your yard. Speaking of which, Divide by Zero may be our biggest loser of the week, due to it being banned in Standard and nerfed in Alchemy and Historic. It now only learns if it targets a spell or permanent with mana value 4 or less. Moving on to the Alchemy cards, which I must remind everyone will also affect their playability in Historic. First on the list, Inquisitor Captain now only triggers when cast, meaning players can't clone it with Glasspool Mimic or blink it with Ephemerate or Soul Herder or whatever to keep the stream of creatures coming. It's rather odd seeing a card which was created and released in a set designed for the sole purpose of rebalancing an entire format get rebalanced. But here we are. Another of the Alchemy set cards that took a hit, except this one is an uncommon, is Fearsome Whelp, which now triggers on upkeep instead of end step. I guess the Dragons deck was too strong, considering they also nerfed the Fearsome Whelp's best buddy, Townraiser Tyrant. Yeah, now it only destroys non-basic lands, so sorry Alchemy Ponza players, not on my watch. Another big change was to one of the linchpins of the black Alchemy decks, Sanguine Brushstroke. They removed the life gain when sacrificing a blood token, making it easier for aggro decks to combat this black menace by instead focusing on the blood artist instead of having to deal with the life gain enchantment. Whew, that's a lot of changes. While many players were expecting some of these bans and acts of rebalancing, many more were left scratching their heads. Many modern players, for example, feel that Lurrus, one of the most powerful creatures ever printed, and a card that is currently in a large number of top-performing modern decks, should have been banned. Others disagree. Wizards decided not to make any changes to Modern, and we'll have to see how that plays out. The biggest uncertainty, however, affects the arena formats, Alchemy and Historic, and their bizarre relationship. Historic players are still wondering why their decks are being affected by nerfs and buffs taking place in Alchemy, a supposedly entirely different format. While Wizards of the Coast has clearly signaled that they will not hesitate to ban or nerf cards simply to shake up a format, they've also not given any indication that they'll refund any wild cards spent by players who then have those cards nerfed to the point of uselessness, like Hullbreaker Horror or Lear, etc. All this is causing many players to hesitate getting into these formats to begin with, and many more entrenched players are leaving those formats entirely. So, how will it all shake out? Well, all we the players can do is wait and see. This is MTG News with Damien and MysteryMTG.com. Until next time, never stop slinging those spells.